So the first thing that we have to do for our steak is we need 3 packages of bean curd sheets. Now these are the fresh frozen bean curd sheets. It's a little bit different. You can get the dried bean curd sheets, but it's gonna be a little bit different to work with. You might have to follow just a few extra steps. But the very first thing that we wanna do is we wanna open these up, and then we're going to unfold all of the layers. Every layer in this is gonna be stuck together. We wanna make sure that each layer is individually pulled apart. Okay, so sometimes it's not gonna tear completely in a sheet. You can see this one started to rip. It doesn't really matter because this is meat, it's inconsistencies. I talk about that a lot. Inconsistencies is a very important thing when you're trying to mimic the textures of meat or beef or any sort of meat product in general. They're never perfect. It's never perfect strands or perfect fibers. It's always gonna be a little varied. So if it starts to rip, you could try to go from the other side. Otherwise, just let it go. Okay, so these are all pulled apart. We have all of our individual sheets. Some are ripped perfectly square, some are not. That's no big deal. Again, like I said, don't worry about it. Now, if you have a dried soy skin, this next step's gonna be a heck of a lot harder. And even if with a fresh soy skin, sometimes it always doesn't come out fresh and soft like these. If your soy skin is cracking when you bend it, then it needs to be dampened slightly. Now at this point, you can have a little bit of fun and dampen it with some of the flavoring broth that we're gonna be making next. But in this scenario, we don't have to because our soy skin is perfect, soft, and it's ready to roll. So all I'm gonna do to make these steak textures, these steak grains, is I'm gonna tightly roll our soy skin up into a little sushi roll or, you know, kind of like burrito-esque little roll. Not really a burrito because we're not filling it with anything. And then once we have that rolled up, we're just going to slice very thin, almost like noodles, like spaghetti noodles, just thin hairline slices. But we just want to get those very, very thin slices. These slices are going to be the fibers of your steak. So the thinner you get them, the more realistic it's gonna come out. Steak doesn't have real thick, long, flat, noodle-esque kind of fibers in it. Okay, so now that we have our soy skin, it's all sliced up, it's all into our individual little fibers that we need, we're gonna create this steak pretty much how we would create any sort of like textured burger, just like the Beyond Burger or the Impossible Burger, where they used a textured protein and then they added a filler and binder. We're gonna do the same thing, except instead of textured protein, we're using a different protein, which is a soy skin. So for this next step, we just have to drop all of the soy skin into a large saucepan. We're gonna cover it completely with water, and then we're gonna add our beef seasoning. For this one, we're just gonna be using an artificial beef flavored broth mix. It's gonna be a vegan broth. There's plenty of vegan broths on the market, so you can use the one that you really like to use. Me personally, I always like to use the Shanggie beef broth mix. This stuff comes out good. It's so good. You can find it at just about any Asian market and Amazon. I'll leave the link in my description below. Add about 2 tablespoons of our beef broth mix. It's gonna make them super, super meaty. Bring this up to a boil, let them boil for about 30 minutes. Okay, so now that this is boiling, we're gonna add a tablespoon of cocoa powder, a tablespoon of beetroot powder, and a tablespoon of blackstrap molasses. So we're adding all 3 of these ingredients for a few reasons. It's gonna help with the flavor. It's gonna make it a little bit more meaty. Blackstrap molasses has a nice irony taste, which is very similar to the way that steak has that irony taste to it. The beetroot powder also adds a little bit to that kind of irony element, but it also adds to the color. We're gonna get a little bit more natural, darker colors out of using beetroot powder. Beetroot powder has a really cool property where it is very red, almost blood red to begin with, and as it heats, it turns dark gray. Very similar gray to how your steak would be. The cocoa powder also is going to round off the flavor. Cocoa powder has a lot of darker elements to it that is very common in steak. It's gonna be your savory side of it. Now you're probably thinking chocolates with the cocoa powder, but the chocolate element isn't there unless you add sugar, which we're not adding in this case. So this has already been boiling. Let's go ahead and strain this out. Now we are going to save this liquid for later. We might need some extra broth and we don't want to lose all that flavor, which I just lost a little bit of it. So we've strained this. All we need to do is I'm just gonna move this over, this kind of hot mass of soy skin. We're just gonna move this over to a plate because we want this to cool down a little bit. I'm also gonna try to separate this. I don't want the weight of this to kind of like start kind of forming it together. When this dries, I don't want it to be one big sticky mass. I wanna be able to tear it apart and keep these fibers separated. Okay, so the soy skin is cool, and you can kind of start to see how this is gonna form into a steak. Maybe, I can see how it's gonna form into a steak. But our next step is going to be to add our binders and our fillers, a little bit more protein. So let's get moving. Okay, we're just gonna add this into a large bowl. The next thing that we're gonna add is about a tablespoon of olive oil, and then just kind of lightly massage that in. So the olive oil is gonna act as part of the fat for this, but it's also gonna kind of help separate these strands, these individual little fibers, to kind of help get fillers in between it and things like that. Now the cool thing is the methycellulose that we're about to add will kind of emulsify slightly with the oil, so you don't have separated oil throughout this steak. So at this point, we're gonna add just a touch of filler, and we're gonna be using pea protein. I'm gonna do 2 tablespoons of pea protein, mung bean protein. It's all gonna work the same. I like pea protein because it has a mild taste, and it does work kind of well with a binder. And then lastly, 3 tablespoons of methylcellulose. This is methylcellulose 4000 or methylcellulose high viscosity. I'll leave a link in the description below for the methylcellulose I use. So at this point, we're just gonna massage those powders in. Now, I've noticed that mine seems to be a little bit drier than what I want it to be. At this stage, it needs to be pretty wet. This methylcellulose is gonna suck in tons of liquid, and we need to make sure that that is fully hydrated before we move to the next step. So I'm gonna add probably about a tablespoon of extra liquid, maybe 2 tablespoons of extra liquid to mine. You're gonna kind of judge it. You want it to be almost kind of jelly, like gel-like, when you first mix this in. You can keep adding a little bit more liquid in until you get that consistency. Think about how like your wet Beyond Burger would feel. This should feel very similar. Okay, so this looks really good. I'm really happy with it. I kind of just kneaded it down to the bottom of the bowl. I made sure that that methylcellulose and the protein powder was mixed throughout. We're just gonna cover this up, let it sit for about 20 minutes. Methylcellulose needs some time to hydrate. If you don't give it that time, it's not gonna work right, and this is all gonna fall apart in the end. 20 minutes, be right back. Okay, so we're about 10 minutes into the resting period. This is looking really good. You can see the methylcellulose has sucked up a lot of that moisture. It's kind of starting to bind and form into one thing. And you all know the one thing that YouTube needs for these videos to get promoted and people to see them is if you like, comment, and subscribe. It makes such a huge difference, and it would mean the world to me. Leave a comment down below. What video you want to see next? What's your favorite video? I just want to hear from you. I just want to talk to you. Okay, so this is done. This looks solid. It looks legit. It's gonna come out, it's gonna have a very almost like burger-like consistency where you're gonna be able to form it up, and it's sticky, as you can see. It's gonna get all over your hands. So at this point, we're gonna form a few steaks. We can probably get, I'm gonna say 2 or 3 steaks out of this. And I think the easiest way to form these steaks to actually get that pressure in there is to wrap them with something. You can use parchment paper. Today, I'm gonna use some plastic wrap. Now, this isn't like a very common way of doing things. We're just kind of experimenting here. I know this is gonna come out good and it's gonna come out like a steak, but we really need this to be formed really tightly, very densely. So I'm gonna do on this piece of plastic wrap is just a little drop of olive oil. It's just gonna help us so it doesn't stick to the plastic wrap. We don't want the plastic wrap to do its normal job here. We just want it to kind of help us form this together. So I'm gonna take about 1/3 of this mixture, break it off, keeping it in its shape kind of how it currently is. And then we're just gonna form ourselves a small, almost New York strip-like kind of form. And then just press tightly. And you could see, really see how these fibers kind of all start to work together. And now we have our steak. Now this should be fairly tightly packed. It should hold together very well. This is gonna be perfect. Okay, so keeping the steak on the plastic wrap, go ahead and season it up with a little bit of kosher salt, black pepper, and some garlic powder. Get some oil in a pan, get that heated up to about a medium-high heat. Throw it right in the skillet from the plastic wrap and heat it up both sides, 3-4 minutes on each side. Give it a nice sear. And then look at the way this thing sizzles. Look at the fat. When you press it, there is fat that comes out of this steak. This is the best steak I have made yet. Baby, look at this steak. Look at this thing.
It looks amazing and delicious and like a steak, and I can't wait to eat it.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I'm really excited. I don't know why I gave you the knife. Give me the knife back.
Okay.
I'm gonna give you a little cut here. So, baby, this is made out of your favorite soy skin.
I love it.
I know you love soy skin, but you can see it's a super tender steak.
It looks like a steak, yeah.
Super, super tender steak. Grab your bite.
Okay.
Let's get going. What do you think about the look real quick?
Yeah, it looks like a steak. It's crispy on the outside. It looks really tender on the inside. The texture is very steaky.
The texture is super steaky. You know what the thing that I'm seeing is, because it is like falling apart a little.
Yeah.
It's kind of like brisket-y.
Oh, you're right. Yeah,
So
it does have a brisket look.
Yeah, it looks almost like brisket. So really, we made a brisket steak. Cheers.
Okay, let's try it. This is awesome.
It's really good. Give me a rundown, baby.
Yeah. So it definitely has like a really good steak flavor. Very like a bit smoky on the outside.
Yeah.
The inside is really tender, so
Super
it's just
tender.
like a tender, like falls apart in your mouth steak, and it has a nice bite to it. It's firm.
Real nice
and
bite.
I love how like the outside is harder and crispy, kind of, and it has a good bite, and then it just falls apart in your mouth.
So the sear is really nice. There's tons of flavor, but the sear, with the way the soy skin is, it does kind of just it does tend to just kind of peel away from the steak itself. Altogether, though, the flavor, the seasoning, this is meaty.
If it falls apart at all, or like doesn't stay together like you were saying, like that doesn't bother me. Like I think it does stay together for the most part, unless you pull it apart, you know?
So with all the steaks that I've made, eggplant steak, I've made seitan steaks, the gluten steaks. The nice thing about this one is it's gluten-free. Where do you think this ranks?
Yeah, I think this is my favorite one because I like
soy skin.
I like soy skin and I like all of them. But I mean, the seitan ones are really good, but it always has that little background of the bready flavor.
Yeah.
You know? So I think that's why I think this just is so easy to resemble steak.
It really does have a good steak. I can't believe I haven't done this one before. Okay, well, this is our dinner.
Yay!
Yay!